now, just so you all know. Welcome to It's Peer Support, Not Peer Pressure. I went back and looked, and I think we're actually at the 14th or 15th Lunch and Learn that we have done starting with COVID. So we are so excited that we continue to get a bunch of people here joining us, and those who go back and review our recordings. And always drop me a line on Messenger or text to let us know what you think of these Lunch and Learn series. I am happy to say that Lynn Legere is back with us today. We missed you last week, Lynn. You were on vacation.
I was. I'm doing the good old vacation thing, and I highly recommend it, even when we have nowhere to go.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. That means that people don't have to just listen to me drone on and on. So we are glad to have you. Lynn is going to be facilitating a bit of our presentation today. You can probably guess that every week our topic is increasing in terms of intensity, things that make you go, and, you know, hopefully some either eye-opening experiences or thoughts that maybe you hadn't considered before. And with every week, we are trying to build up to these topics that we don't necessarily get privy to as peer support specialists in the work that we do, or as people with lived experience in mental health and substance use issues in our treatment in our community. So our disclaimer is to please actively participate, use the chat to ask questions. Silence is definitely not golden in this space, because it's going to take all of us to have a meaningful dialogue and walk away with something that is usable for each of you. I want to start by sharing just a little bit about the Lunch and Learns. They are sponsored by Peer Voice North Carolina. You will hear it being called PVNC. It is a federally funded initiative that came into North Carolina to build the voice, a collective voice of people that have been directly impacted by mental health and co-occurring substance use challenges. And so PVNC is a statewide movement bringing our voices together to impact change. And I'll share with you in a moment the types of things that we do with PVNC. On the right-hand side, you are going to see how to connect. We have a Facebook page that we post different things, ask questions, get surveys, and create an opportunity for us to dialogue back and forth and provide input in shaping PVNC. The second one is a survey, so people are welcome to log on to the survey, to fill it out. That gives us an ability to share with you newsletters and new opportunities as they arise. And then the third one is a brand new YouTube station that we started as a result of these Lunch and Learn series. People have asked if they could have a copy of the recording, a copy of the PowerPoint or the presentation. So the recordings are going on YouTube, and the PowerPoint presentations are going into a Dropbox. If you would like the link to the Dropbox, just go on our Facebook page and you will see both the Dropbox as well as the YouTube station link. So it's two of the ways to stay connected. So just a few things about our work. PVNC was really designed to influence policies related to lived experience by and for the folks that have been directly impacted, like you, like myself, like Lynn, and other folks that are on the call, as well as our allies in recovery. We do this partly through different coalitions. We are up to 7 different coalitions that are topic-based. This just gives you an idea of what the coalitions are. And I'm not going to go through all of them. I will just share a couple of them with you. The Peer Justice Initiative, or PJI, is for people that have been involved in the criminal justice system, most of whom who have been incarcerated either at the state level, the local level, or federal prisons, that are working together to shift policy around criminal justice reform, but also to bring forensic peer support into the state of North Carolina, both in practice as well as training and specialty credential. And then Peer Wellness Center, the second one, is a group that have been working together that have actually supported the state to fund the pilot of 2 peer wellness centers in North Carolina. Those peer wellness centers, we should find out today or next week which programs were selected to be funded, but that work directly came out of PVNC's Peer Wellness Center pilot. So those are examples of different things that we have going on. Some of you are joining us because of the integrated care initiative that we have with PVNC. And we do have a supervisory series that is starting with North Carolina Families United that's going to be starting in August for our providers in that integrated care series. So once that is done and we pilot it, it will then become launched statewide. So we're very excited to share some of the work that we're doing on the policy side. We also are convened to really influence and elevate standards for peer support in North Carolina. And that includes shaping the service definition, clinical coverage policy, and funding that is connected to it, increasing or bringing in standards for certified peer support specialists. We have an expert commission that just submitted recommendations on July 1st to the state of North Carolina for an oversight body, a credentialing and certification process, as well as a decertification process for peer supports in North Carolina. And under that, we also are advocating for funding streams for independent peer-run or consumer-operated agencies in North Carolina. Because as you know, the funding has gone mostly to peers being integrated into behavioral health settings and medical settings, but the funding has not historically been available for independently operated peer-run and consumer-run agencies. So that's part of our work on that side. And then the last one is that PVNC is tasked with developing a technical assistance center. This is a part of that TAC. We were going to start it, and then COVID hit us all, and so we decided to make use of the technology, make it virtual, and this is our 14th or 15th Lunch and Learn. But we are developing continuing education training for peer support specialists that was in the scope of practice of peer support, and for non-peer supervisors to truly understand what peer support is not, and how to effectively support them professionally in the workplace and integrated into their environments. So that is my 5-minute spiel on Peer Voice North Carolina, and we are so glad that you can join us. So the topic today, the official title is It's Peer Support, Not Peer Pressure. And there's a whole bunch of different pieces to that, some of which we're going to build out in future Lunch and Learns, because there's a lot of information to absorb and skills that can be developed around how do we ensure we're providing support and not pressure. And a part of it that we're going to talk about today is advice versus support, dignity of risk, and informed decision making, and share some tips, some structures that you could start employing or continue to employ in your work, and maybe some information that is new to you or reinforcement of information that you already know, that is all consistent with peer support and the practice of peer support. So all of that being said, I am going to hand it over to Lynn, and we are going to do what we do. I will jump in throughout. She will ask me questions, vice versa. And I hope you enjoy it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Cherene. You want to give me the controls, darling?
Yes, let me see how to do that.
Yes.
I'm going to make you the host. Here you go.
Thank you.
You're the hostess. You're welcome.
I am the hostess with the mostest. Well, welcome, everybody. The one thing I wanted to say is, as Cherene was mentioning, PVNC is working on a lot of things, but it's open to everybody. This is meant to be a statewide peer-run organization. So I want to invite everyone who'd like to participate to please join in. Cherene, I still can't do the slides, honey. So maybe you can just do it. Thank you. All right, so we are going to be talking about one of the great dilemmas that we have in our work, which is really keeping the support in the peer support and not sort of defaulting into that place of advice. So let's start by a simple thing of a definition. So support, I love this definition, is just to be present, give some encouragement, give assistance and comfort. So it's a very being present type of a thing that becomes challenging in our systems. Next slide, Cherene. So support is, and this sort of sounds like our definition of peer support, right? It's mutual. It's about being with. It's about staying in the passenger seat rather than stepping into the driver's seat of someone else's life. And most importantly, it's believing in that person's ability to determine their own way. And this is especially in those moments where they're struggling to find that way, to believe that they can, if given the time and listening to them, they can get to that place of figuring out what's their best route. Cherene? Support is validating the feelings that the person is having, validating their actions, even and especially when we think to ourselves, I might not have gone in that direction. We still want to validate that person's experiences, their actions, and their feelings. Support is engaging people in a real thoughtful process that empowers the person to develop their own solutions. And of course, sharing our lived experience in a way that connects, that shows empathy, that can inspire hope, and that may share some of the self-help tools or recovery tools that we have found helpful along the way. And so in essence, really being supportive means that we remember that I am an expert at not being an expert, and that takes a lot of expertise. This definition really goes against sort of the model of taking care of and assisting people that we all grew up with, that we were all indoctrinated with in our lives. This asks us to do it differently, to step back and to realize we are only the expert on ourselves, not on anyone else. And so to support is to allow them to find their way. But our DNA, our helpful spirit defaults from that place of let me support you to let me advise you, let me show you the way, let me quote unquote help you to move forward. So this is our good old Lucy, right? Advice, help, 5 cents, the doctor is in. That's the way that we think about it, but that's actually not the way we do it as peer supporters. Ultimately, advice is our opinion about what someone could do, should do, what the best resolution to the situation is according to our lens. So we're counseling them, and counsel, of course, is not what a peer supporter is. So the words that we often hear when we sort of slip into this place of advising rather than supporting are things like, well, you should do this. And I'm going to say right up front, I am guilty of all of this. So this is not about you guys. This is about us. This is about all of us that we sort of default here. So you should just do this maybe. Well, you could have done that. Or, well, you won't get there this way. You can't do it, or you don't really know how to do it. And my favorite, I do this all the time under my, sorry for the noise, under my supposedly sharing my story. If I were you, I would just do this like I did. So all these words, either directly or in veiled language, take us from supporter to advisor, which is not where we want to end up going. So why do we default to this place? And I'm going to ask you guys to think about your own experience. Think about when sort of you find yourself doing this, and think about why, and post in the chat what some of your thoughts are about why we just naturally default to this place. Any thoughts? I'm going to make you work today. Oh, I'm sure I'm not the only one. Ah, the illusion of power. Yes. So Devin says, it's easy that because we know it works. So Devin, I'm going to ask you to hold on to the we know it works part. That's what we're going to talk about. But it is efficient for sure, right? And Sam says it's sort of natural to want to help. Absolutely. We come to our work wanting to do the best help that we can for people. And this really seems like it's helpful, right? And the other thing, and this is what Devin is saying in here, is that if it works for me, it seems like it might work for you, but it actually doesn't always do that. And that's the challenge for this. We default to this place and we even feel good about it. We feel like we're doing the helpful thing. And that's because we are all, in some degree or other, fixers, right? Right? So these chats are coming in quick. I love it. So let me get back to Donald is saying, so thank you, Donald, is that this idea of believing in people, it's more than theoretical. We can't just say it and not truly believe it. It only works when we truly believe it. And that sometimes is a challenge for us to really hold in our hearts that everyone has that potential, right? So it's not just theoretical, right? And another piece, and PRN host that Cherene put in it, we want people to feel better. We're uncomfortable seeing people in distress. Absolutely. And we learned that. Thank you, Martha. We're just taught to do that. That's the way our systems are designed. Step in and do something for someone because they can't do it themselves. Another piece, and Fred, you're mentioning this, it's quicker, right? We sort of assume somebody needs support. They don't know what to do. So let me just step in and do it. It's going to be quick. It's going to be efficient. And I know, because I've seen it before, I know it's the best route. All of those are so true. And all of them have some validity to them, but not necessarily as much as we think. Part of the problem comes from within, and it's this fixing problem, right? I don't know about you, I'm going to raise my hand high. I'm a fixer. I think to myself, well, the answer is obvious. Let me step in and do this for you or tell you what to do because I know you're going to feel better. The funny thing about that is the person I'm really trying to make feel better is me. Right? It's uncomfortable to leave somebody in distress. It's uncomfortable to watch somebody struggle, trying to sort of work through their feelings and get a little further below to their own inner wisdom. When we sit with people in those places, we feel those feelings too. And so what we naturally do without even realizing it or thinking about it is we revert to, oh my God, I got to take an action so I feel better. And so that action becomes, oh, well, why don't you just do that? Or why don't, have you ever thought of this? I think this might make it better because really we can't stand sitting in that place. It's hard to feel people's pain. And so we revert to this place of fixing. Now, it may ultimately be helpful, but it's also important to acknowledge that a lot of that is driven from our own discomfort of sitting with the feelings. Often it's more about us than it is about them. Actually, more often, it's a lot more helpful to the other person for us to just sit and wait and give them the time they need. Unfortunately, though, it's harder on us if we don't know how to sit with those feelings yet. So we sort of default to this fixing place. In reality, and I love this little quote here, unsolicited advice is the junk mail of life. If we bring it back to ourselves and we think about what it feels like for us when we've reached out to somebody to listen to us while we sort of figure out our way, and they start throwing in advice, it doesn't feel good. It feels like, oh, they don't want to listen. They don't want to take the time. They want me to just get over it and move on. So it doesn't feel nearly as good on the other side as it does when we feel like, oh, good, I solved this problem for them. Aren't I great? And we can walk away with those good feelings. So it really is a lazy way to support people because it ends up short circuiting their process. Cherene, next slide. So here's a cute little comic, which I like. And that's sort of the essence of what we're saying is that just because it works for us, just because it's worked for another person, it may not be the right thing for the person that we're supporting. And we really need to give them the time to find their way because maybe they're not us, right? Maybe they have a different route they need to go. So fixing things. What are some of the things that we might be inclined to do to fix someone else who we're supporting? Think about that for a minute. And maybe add some of those in the chat box. And Cherene, if you want to hit the cursor again. So these are the two sides of it, right? What are the things that we might be inclined to fix for people rather than supporting? And imagine if that were the other way around. What would that feel like for you? So let's just think about this first question first, right? What are some of the things in our everyday work that we're inclined to go to that fix-it place rather than supporting? And try to be specific. Think of situations where you've just defaulted to the fix-it. No one else here defaults there. Oh, come on, guys. So Devin's saying, absolutely, it doesn't feel good on my end, right? It has the opposite end, right? Absolutely. People try to tell me what to do. I usually do the opposite just because.
Yeah, and Lynn, Sam said, I'll start reading the post just to save your
Thank
voice
you.
a little bit.
Thank
But
you.
yeah, you're welcome. Sam said, things that we have actually personally experienced and fixed already is when there's a temptation to just jump in there and do it for somebody.
Absolutely. Again, if this isn't something that we do because we're bad, it's something that we do because we have a heart, right? This is a heart-filled inclination. But we're going to start talking about why this help may not be as helpful as we think it is, right? Make appointments for people. Absolutely. How many of us have said, oh, I'll take care of that. Let me just put in a call for you, right? Instead of sitting down and saying, well, I can support you to make that call. Oh, you don't know how to do it? Here, let's go through the steps. Here's what you would do. Do you already know sort of when you could do the appointment, right? Things like that, helping people to walk through. Somebody else says pressuring someone to be compliant. Oh my God, I hope not. But yes, right? Why don't you just do what they want you to do? Why don't you just take your meds the way they're prescribed? I know some peer workers have been asked to actually go and count people's meds to make sure they actually took them, right? That is certainly not support. That's not even advice, really. To me, that's getting into coercion. Anna says, I love this. Take to appointment stores, other places they have to go, right? How often do we default to, oh, okay, I can give you the ride, instead of thinking through with them, well, what are your options for rides? Is there a bus that gets there? Can I help you learn how to take that bus? Or all these other kind of options so that people aren't dependent on us. Because God forbid, what happens if they have to get there Saturday? Or as we saw with COVID, what happened to the folks that we support when all of our brick and mortar shut down? People were left without the people that do everything for them. Really not helpful, right?
Yeah, and there's other examples in there, Lynn, like telling people what their solutions are, like going to 12 steps,
Yes.
telling people to just pray or repent.
Yep. Yeah, and it can be anything from the little things like, oh, I'll make the call, to the big things, right? If you don't do 30, 60, 90, you're going to drink, right? So there's all levels of how much power we exert over people in the name of help, right? So we want to really rethink it, because it is peer support that we're trying to do, not peer pressure. And anytime that we're fixing it for people, we're really taking a power over point with them. We're saying, I know more about what you should do than you do. So let me tell you, not support you. I love this image, right? That person down there, it's really us being out there pressuring. So we want to start thinking, and next slide, Cherene. We want to start thinking a little more globally, because it's not all us. You know, I think it's important to acknowledge what piece of this is us. And because we do have a piece in it, right? We're stepping in to fix it because something in us doesn't want to sit with the feelings. But our systems are also encouraging us all the time to go to the fix it place rather than the support place, because of a number of things. First of all, time. It's a lot quicker to fix it for people. Let me make the call instead of sitting down and talking to you about the call, maybe role playing with you how you'd have the conversation, all of that, much quicker. Just let me pick up the phone myself and do it. Documentation is structured in a way that it's really expecting us to write what things we did to, quote unquote, help the person. So saying I supported them to think about this, it's not really going to fly as much in the documentation. And then just the whole culture of our system, that medical model culture that still persists, is very much a system that comes out of the idea that people cannot think for themselves. And our job is to be the ones who think and direct what they need, what they should do. We assess their needs. We tell them what they need, and then we deliver what they need. That's the nature of the system that we're working within. So we have things that are sort of challenging us to stay in that support place from our system. Next slide, Cherene.
Yeah, and let me just add, actually Lori just added partly what I was going to say. I'm going to add billing to it.
Yep.
And I'm going to add productivity, right? So there is a pressure, not only for peer support specialists, but others that work in these environments to bill. And there is a pressure to have productivity, which is the time you can bill and get paid for versus the percentage of time that you spend on things that are not billable, like notes and meetings and trainings and things like that. And so I think when we look at all three of these, the idea of time constraints, the idea of documentation, the idea of a medical model culture, and then you add onto it a billable system, a managed care system in which most of our services are provided, there is a lot of pressure on both peer support specialists as well as other people that work within the field to just get things done. Another layer, as you're getting started with the slideshow, is
Yeah,
COVID.
thank you.
No, I mean, another layer is COVID. You know, we are finding ourselves making a lot more referrals for and appointments for people because they're in very urgent situations right now, or referrals can only come from a service provider. People can't self-refer, or time we're working remotely. And so during this time in particular, I think it's very easy to fall into the doing for people instead of or doing to people instead of doing with people. And it's understandable why that becomes the situation. And then Lori's saying, yes, definitely COVID is impacting and reinforcing the idea of productivity as opposed to supporting other people to grow in ways that are meaningful to them.
Absolutely. And so we have sort of this inner thing that from kindness says, I want to help and jump in and do for. And then on top of that, oops, don't go there. Go back. Thank you. And then on top of that, we also have the system. I don't know what's going on here. Cherene, is that you or is my screen just going crazy?
No, that was me. I was trying to
Okay,
make
good.
the box. I apologize.
That's all right, as long as my system's not doing it on its own. Makes me feel better. So we've got all of these things working against us to go to that place of fixing. But what we know, because we know from our own experiences of when people try to step in and advise and fix for us, is that that's not what feels the most helpful, right? That for most of us, we're not looking for someone to come in and fix us. What we're looking for is someone to just support and help people to get to the place where they can fix themselves and feel empowered and feel good about moving forward in their lives. So it is a challenge, and it's a challenge that, that is from many different places. I'm sorry, guys, I just asked for the remote control, and so it just get a little wonky here. All right, so we're going to talk about how do we understand the why of the system, and then how do we go against the system despite the system. How does that sound? So I want to read you a quote here, and then I'm going to tell you about where this comes from. So overprotection, actually I'm going to let you guys read it to yourselves because I have this terribly wonky voice. So just take a moment and read that yourself. Okay, I'm going to assume people have had time to read that. Cherene, are you doing those boxes? Oh my Lord, I keep getting and losing my controls here.
No, I'm not doing anything. I don't know what's going on.
All right, why don't you just forward the slides?
Okay.
Yeah, every time I try to, it crashes. So,
Okay.
so next slide. We'll just keep it this way. This is the end of that quote, but I wanted to give it its own page. So this is the situation that systems were in for many, many years. The mental health system is trying to move away from this overprotection, but I would argue it is still very much there, that much of our system is repeating this movement of overprotection, which really has devastating consequences on the people that come for services. This guy, Robert Persky, who wrote this quote, came up with an alternative concept to help us move away from this. Next slide, Cherene. He talks about this idea of dignity of risk. And I don't know how many of you have heard this. I know some of you have, but my guess is that some of you have not. And the idea of dignity of risk is that self-determination and the right to take reasonable risks are essential to the dignity and self-esteem. And so it should not be impeded by excessively cautious caregivers concerned about their duty of care. What he's saying is that our duty of care mantra has gone way overboard to the point where people very often no longer have this dignity of risk, which is essential to just living a life with self-esteem, with a sense of dignity, with a sense that I can actually be an agent in my own life. And it was such an important concept that the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities adopted this as their first guiding principle. And it's the same thing, this respect for the inherent dignity, individual autonomy, including the freedom to make one's choices and the independence of people. So this dignity of risk was so important that it became the #1 guiding force. So this leads to the question, as we think about our systems, who all have the knowledge that overprotecting is actually harmful, it comes to the question then of what makes risk risky. And I want you guys to answer in the chat box as you think about your work setting, the dilemmas that you run into, the conversations that you may have about risk. What are the things in our own minds and in the minds of the people that we work with that make risk risky? What are we worried about?
So Lori said the challenge is provider agencies are driven to mind their own risk. Risk management is a barrier to respecting self-determination.
Absolutely is. And so my question, Lori, is why? What is the risk? What makes risk risky? What are they afraid of?
Devin said, I found people worry about people taking a risk and something bad happening, and they feel like they're responsible for that outcome.
Right. So people are worried about people's well-being, right? So there's an altruistic piece about that risk piece. But Anna, you just got the prize for the day. It's liability. Liability is the elephant in the room. And what we often hear is, well, I'm worried about the person. I don't want this to set the person up to fail. Oh, the person might have feelings if it doesn't work out the way they want it to work. We have all sort of these altruistic things that cover up the elephant, but the real elephant is liability.
Well, I'll tell you as a CEO, the liability issue or concern is real. However, it is definitely turned into the guiding factor to make decisions, to protect people, to try to minimize risk, to get into advice giving, and honestly, to punitively discharge people or to even have action like involuntary commitment when somebody mentions the word self-harm. Liability is at the center of a lot of those decisions, and there is a part of it that is real and valid, and there is another part of it that is completely misunderstood or exacerbated due to fear.
Absolutely. So this liability thing, it's what one of the regional directors up in Massachusetts used to call the front page of the Globe. We can't be on the front page of the Globe. That's the big Boston paper. We can't make the paper because then we lose our funding, then we lose our jobs. So it's not about people's welfare. It's certainly not about people's recovery. It's about the well-being of the agency and the well-being of the staff. I hate to be so crass about it, but in the end, that's really what it comes down to. Right. And so we see this, and Anna's bringing in recovery court, right, using jail sanctions when someone has, who's that? Who's that? We gotta turn somebody's mute on. Mute. All right. Got it. Sorry about that. So Anna's mentioning the recovery court that they'll use jail sanction when somebody has had has not worked out perfect. And again, it's about liability, right? It's not about what went on. How can we help? How can we help you do better? How can we help other people do better? It is about, oh my God, we might end up in the paper. How can we stop this situation right now? And the way it's always stopped is some sort of action that limits the person's self-determination, limits the person's ability to think through and learn and grow and experience life the way the rest of us have the privilege and the right to experience our life. So we see it in every way around.
And Lynn, this is where we have to become really informed as people who utilize services, people that have been labeled with mental health or substance use issues, and or peer support specialists. The truth of the matter is that some of the approaches that we use to minimize liability actually create greater liability or greater risk. So I think about, Anna, your example with recovery court. Part of our education with recovery court is the highest risk for overdose is when somebody has been utilizing substances, gets sanctioned into court, and then comes out of court and starts utilizing at the rate that they did before they came into court. We have found that 24 hours and 48 hours in jail time actually has increased the rate of risk of death due to oversight when somebody ends up getting released from that 24 to 48 hours. And we have to know that information and be able to advocate in systems that are trying to decrease liability, that are talking about safety and risk and all of these things, to make sure that they're also informed about the true liability and the true risk that goes along with some of the decisions that are being made. Same thing with IVC. The suicide rates upon release from involuntary hospitalization due to suicide risk actually is exponentially higher among people that have been discharged for inpatient treatment when it's involuntary. We have to be able to have that information and share it and advocate.
That's right. And so sometimes it's totally flipped, that what we do to minimize risk increases risk in a very obvious severe way right up front. The other way it happens is the financial risk, because if people don't have the experiences, thank you, Lori, to learn and grow through making mistakes like we all do. Nobody on this earth grows without failing. Failure is, I heard a great acronym for it. First attempt in learning, right? A fail is a first attempt in learning, because none of us have landed on this earth knowing all the ways to go inherently. We get out there, we try it, we fall flat in our face. We say, okay, so maybe I won't do it that way next time. Or if you're like me, you'll do it another 5 times that way until you finally get it and go, all right, I give it, just isn't working that way, right? That's what humans get the right to do, is try and fail and learn and try again and grow. But people that have mental health diagnoses don't get that right, because systems are too afraid that the failure will reflect poorly on them. And so the consequences is people don't learn, they don't grow, and in fact, they regress. And I don't like that term, but I couldn't think of a better one right now. They go backwards. They take on learned helplessness. They lose their self-esteem. They lose their capacity to even know what they might want to do. And they become totally dependent on our systems to make sure that they're okay. So it's a huge disservice that we're doing to people in the name of help. And so we didn't put the slide in, but I always default to my friend Pat Deegan, who says help that doesn't help is not help, right? So I think it's incumbent on us to really think about sort of, are we really helping when we're doing these things that we may call help? So the elephant in the room is not safety. The elephant in the room is liability. But that doesn't mean that safety isn't part of the discussion, right? Where is that line between what is safe, or let me rephrase that, where is the line at which point we need to take away somebody's dignity of risk and impose something else on? And so these questions really help us to think about this idea of safety, because in our systems, the idea of safety is often stretched. So we want to really ask, what does it mean to be safe? And who gets to determine that for us, right? Can people really ever be safe, right? Can we as a system keep someone safe? Is that a role we should have, that we can have even, right? What's the flip side of trying to keep people safe through restriction, coercion, or even abuse? Is it keeping people safe, or is it really hurting more? And what about the individual cost of this idea of safety? If it's resulting in loss of dignity, loss of freedom, loss of autonomy, is that safety worthwhile? Or do these consequences outweigh the benefits? So let me ask you guys to put in the chat box, where do you think that line is? Where we say, okay, in this situation, we're going to take away your right to self-determine, to have your own dignity of risk. And in this situation, we're going to step in and say, safety trumps. And so now we're going to do something rather than let you just be self-determining. Where is that line? What kind of situations can you think of from your own work settings where it makes sense to step in and take over someone's individual self-determination? Any thoughts?
Yeah, and Lynn, this is where the conversation gets, this is why I said this is going to be intense, because we really want to think through safety and dignity of risk. Under what situations do you think that we moving in to ensure safety outweighs the person's right to take a risk and vice versa?
Right. And Devin, you bring up a good point. Sometimes people are going to ask and come to us and say, I want you to take over. And that's different, right? That is still being self-determining. That's saying, for me right now, I don't really feel in control. And for me right now, I think going to some setting or hospital, whatever it is, where I can get more help is what I want. So that's still self-determining. So
Anna says, Anna said, when an individual has physically harmed another or themselves, but attempt to de-escalate and support the individual prior to crossing that line. So I think what you're saying, Anna, is there's also an and if the person has threatened or done something like that, that you want to attempt to support the person before crossing the line of taking away their choice, right? Taking away their personal power or their dignity of risk. But if there is with physical harm, that might be an example where safety trumps dignity of risk. I think that's what I hear you saying.
Right.
And then Lori said safety from a person harming another person. So again, similar situation. But even in this case, I don't think our culture or systems respond effectively.
Yep. So I think, Lori, what you're saying is that this line is even fuzzy, that we may have things on the far side of this line, but maybe there's sort of this middle gray area where it says warning, we're really quickly approaching this side, but let's not just automatically jump there. Let's still attend to it and see if we can move out of this warning zone back into the place where you can be self-determining, rather than just saying, oh God, you're suicidal, let's call 911 now, right? That even as we're getting to this line, there's gray areas in there, and I agree fully. And I agree also fully that we don't necessarily attend to those moments effectively. You know, I wanted to see if I could get a clip that I saw last night. I'm a court TV watcher, and they were highlighting this situation that in their mind was like miraculous, where there was a man, looked like a homeless man, who was really angry outside of a government building. And he was saying, I want to do this, I want to do that. And there was even some inclination that he may have had a weapon, and he may have been thinking, I want to go in and harm people because I'm so angry. And there was a police officer, probably about 10-15 feet away from this person, overhearing this conversation. And what this woman cop did is she went over and she started talking to him. And she said, I can hear you're really upset. You sound really angry. What's going on? And she had a conversation with him, and in 10 minutes, they had figured out a solution. He said to her, thank you, I really wanted to go in there and have the cops shoot me. And now I don't have to do that. Which was a wonderful situation, but what most stood out to me and why I wanted to get the clip was to the people on the TV show that were showing this clip. This was like a miraculous moment. And I'm sitting there going, well, duh. Why is this such a miraculous moment? Why isn't this our everyday approach? It's so sensible. It just makes sense. So to me, the real disconnect in this clip was that people thought this was so unusual and miraculous. And so that goes back, Lori, to what you're saying, is that even as we begin to approach these places where we may start to say, ooh, we're in that warning zone, we want to still reach out, connect, show the empathy, be there as a connector to see if it's possible to move back out of that warning zone, back to solid footing, right? Absolutely. So the dignity of risk line is way, way over. You guys are great. You know, I should have known with this group of folks, I wasn't going to get what I usually get. I get things like, well, the person's house isn't clean, so we need to go in and clean it. Hell no, right? Well, you know, they're getting cockroaches in there. And I say, well, again, well, maybe when they're tired of cockroaches, they might clean it. Or maybe cockroaches don't bother them as much as they obviously bother you, right? All of these things are places where our systems say we need to step in. But really, that line is way at the end, and it comes up with that word imminent. Imminent threat of harm to self or others. So the person says, I can't stand my life anymore. I have a gun. I'm going to go home and shoot myself. Okay, that might be a time where we jump from dignity of risk to safety overriding with the conversation, Lori, as you say, right? Somebody says to me, you know, I'm feeling really suicidal and I think I might try to find some pills. I think to myself, okay, this isn't imminent. This is not the moment yet. It's that imminence that really is the line. Anything short of that, our job is to support people to keep their dignity of risk, to be self-determining, to find their way out of whatever challenging situation they're in.
Yeah, you know, Lynn, Sam had put in the chat around where that line is, homicidal and suicidal. And, you know, we could do an entire training just about suicide and the risk, the danger and imminency, and how to understand better that space of gray versus that line of imminence. We don't train a lot of people on understanding the difference and what to look for and how to gauge, because some of it is an art, some of it is experience, but a lot of it is also skill and practice. And, you know, perhaps that can be a topic for a future either training or lunch and learn around imminence and suicide risk.
Absolutely, because that's one of those words that in our systems creates a knee-jerk response. Oh, I feel suicidal. Oh, let's call 911. And that's not the way it should go. And so, Cherene, do you want to talk about these?
Yeah, so the comfort zone is we are completely comfortable with the person's choice. And oftentimes that comfort zone is because the person has either acquiesced or they came to the conclusion that they want to choose what we think that they should do anyways, right? So yeah, I'm going to stay on my medications. Yeah, I'm not going to take a risk and go to work. No, I'm not going to harm myself. So there's a comfort zone that we are accustomed to hearing, looking for, and are trained to be able to focus on. And when people start getting out of that comfort zone or language starts challenging our own comfort and our own training, our own messages or definition of safety, and of course liability and risk, then we get conflicted, right? So what happens when the person is actually either considering a decision that we are not personally comfortable with or we would not endorse as an organization or a peer support specialist, or they have made a choice that we are not comfortable with. And this is where really there is an art form that goes along with relationship and negotiation and communication when the person is either at that place where they've made a choice or they're considering a choice, to make sure that we are not crossing that line between advice and support. But that's a big area. That's the biggest gray area that we find ourselves in if we are in peer support specialist roles, but even with family members and other people in the community is at conflict. And then the third one is the non-negotiable zone. So what are the things that are absolutely not negotiable that will pose an imminent risk of health and safety? I can tell you within our organization at PRN, we have a lot of conversations around the gray because the red zone is not always that clear. So people don't always come and say, well, I am going to hurt myself and this is how I'm going to do it and here's the plan. Oftentimes it emerges as a thought, an idea, we see something in somebody else that lets us know that maybe they're struggling. Usually it emerges like that. It's not as black and white as I'm going to hurt myself and this is what I'm going to do. But as an organization, and as a peer support specialist, it's really important to understand these different zones from the agency's perspective, from the person's perspective, as well as yours. I will tell you that we do a lot of negotiation, and we should be doing a lot of negotiation in what that red zone looks like.
Because yeah, I'm sorry, Cherene, because one other piece that's really important in this is that we think on one side, do we need to make the call or not? We don't spend time to think about what are the consequences if we do. What might be the harm if we make that call, right? Even when it seems really imminent. What kind of trauma might the person experience if we make that choice? So we have to be looking at both sides of the issue. Sorry, Cherene, go ahead.
No, but here's part of the skill. And again, this is a nuance to doing this well. If we have a plan in advance where I know where your red zone is, I know from you, when I say this, when I do this, when I look like this, when I act like this, I am in danger. And we have that conversation and that planning way in advance. We also have the planning of, so what would be helpful when I see that, when I hear you say that, when you have identified that you're at risk, or I see the indications that you just shared with me that it really is more dangerous, what would be helpful in terms of what I can do, what you should do, and what we should do together. That's that advanced planning, so that you're not having to make a decision in the moment during an emergency, because again, we're getting back to our 3 Ps. For those of you that were on our 3P crisis planning, the difference between a crisis and an emergency, and knowing how to help people prevent a crisis when possible, and prevent a crisis from becoming an emergency, and then how to respond in an emergency. Good planning is what helps us so that we don't have to make decisions in the moment or make assumptions. Not always possible. Of course, that's not always possible. But if you're not having those conversations with people about what it looks like when they are really at risk and what you should do, what their desires would be, what would be helpful and what would be harmful, then you are putting yourself and that person in a position of having to make a snapshot decision. And when we have to make a snapshot decision, we often go to safety as our default. Like, we will over ensure safety to the risk of the relationship, to the risk of the dignity, to the risk of, I just needed somebody to talk to, if we don't know that there is a different way.
Yep. Another thing that leads us into that gray zone, or let me rephrase that. The other thing that leads us too quickly into that red zone is the language that people adopt for themselves from the system. I know for years, I just sort of had this connection that had been developed by being in systems for many years. And it sort of went like this. Oh my God, I feel uncomfortable. Oh my God, I must be feeling suicidal. Oh my God, I'm not safe. Oh my God, call my therapist and tell her I'm not safe and I'm feeling suicidal. I had just adopted sort of that narrative that always went with uncomfortable feelings. And I know I'm not the only one. A lot of times when we sit down and we talk with people and we say, okay, so you're not feeling safe. Tell me more about what that's feeling like for you. What's going on? And we give them room to find other words that go with it. It may be that even the person who's indicating, gee, I need more safety, really doesn't. It's just the language that they've learned. And the only solution to uncomfortable feelings without words is going to the hospital, when really a better solution might have been sit down and help the person find the words and find out that there's more words than just uncomfortable, scared, unsafe, suicidal hospital. Yep.
That's right. And some of the skill goes in, we talk about defining help and how to understand the person's definition of help. Let's add to that defining safety and understanding the person's definition of safety, right? So we do slides and we do presentations on redefining help, redefining risk, and redefining safety. That is the skill that goes along with doing this well, and supporting people to find a language that actually matches what they're experiencing, and to not adopt an illness-based language. You know, I used to laugh, Lynn, when you would talk about there are certain phrases that you knew what to say that would land you in the hospital when your friends were going to be in the hospital, so that you could go on vacation together.
Yeah,
in
I made reservations.
hospital.
I made reservations in advance. I just told my providers, put me in the book. And we all went in together.
Yeah, and so, you know, we learn how to do those things, to navigate those systems, and what language to use to get us where we think we need to be, but doesn't necessarily characterize what we're experiencing inside. Anna said the responses can be traumatizing or re-traumatizing, and sometimes when people are responding in the moment, they're actually responding to trauma without the intent of self-harm or harm to others, but that's just kind of how the trauma reaction comes out. And then Lori had said that you used to be a psychiatric nurse, and being involved in concerns about consequences of usual responses, so you tend to think about the consequence of making that call, if you will, getting 911 involved or something like that. And so you're more overly cautious around safety from the usual. Because you evaluate it more globally. Quite honestly, what we want people to do as peer support specialists is to disrupt that automatic training that happens that says you call 911. Somebody mentions suicide, they mention self-harm. To disrupt it, to be curious, to ask questions, to be in relationship, and to evaluate what to do next instead of just reacting from a place of fear and emotion. And there's skill that goes along with it. There's practice, there's awareness, and there's experience that goes along with doing that well.
A lot of times what we're really doing is we're helping people to learn a new language and see a different world. When both feet are in the treatment world, then that's all you know is what treatment has taught you. But there's a whole world of other options out there that people don't know, and so can't even consider until we have the conversations and start exposing people to these other ways and these other options.
So here's another follow-up quote from the same exact person that had the quote before about dignity of risk and the adaptation of risk-averse approaches within systems. Many of our best achievements came from the hard way. And I think, you know, peer support specialists can definitely relate to this. We took risks, fell flat, suffered, pick ourselves up, and tried again. Sometimes we made it, sometimes we did not. Even so, we were given the chance to try. People with labels of mental health challenges need these chances. I think the challenge is getting comfortable with the fact that when we get back to our zones, most everything is dignity of risk, unless we're talking about immediate danger to self and others. And being able to be comfortable with knowing the difference between the comfort zone, the conflicted zone, and advanced planning of the non-negotiable zone is part of what our challenge is when it comes to risky situations or safety situations. Everything else falls in this.
Right. And so Anna says, and it's a really good point, that we may not be the best person to support someone. If someone is up on the upper end of that dignity risk zone and it's pushing all our buttons, then it's up to us to step out and let that person work with someone else who has built up more tolerance and comfort with those hard spaces, so that we're not putting on the person our own discomfort, but giving them the room to find their own way. Great point, Anna.
Yeah, and we're not meeting trauma with trauma, emotion with emotion, anger with anger, fear with fear. All of those things that we know about trauma-informed support, we want to make sure that we are not activated so much that we are exacerbating somebody else's activation. Our role is to support and help people heal and communicate and find their voice and choice and all of those great things that we know that go along with recovery that can lead to recovery and build resilience.
Yep.
If we're activated and we're meeting activation with activation, then it's on. And the person that always loses in that situation is the person in services, because they are the one without the power. We have the ability to petition courts. We have the ability to call 911. We have the ability to remove somebody's rights just by virtue of being the one on the other side of the desk. And so we want to ensure that we are not misusing, overusing, or using it based on emotion and our own trauma and our own stuff. We want to be very intentional about how we show up with people.
So Devin was saying he really loved that quote that was just up. And I always say my short version of that quote is, why walk through a door when I can walk through a wall? You know, I'm never going to learn the easy way. I'm going to walk through that wall and beat myself up, because that's how I learn. That's how most of us learn.
Yeah, so how do we do this as peer support specialists, or even, I would say, beyond peer support in our relationships with others? Informed choice becomes critical, and that is true for all of us. We use this in our everyday experience. We use this every time we go to a doctor, and there is an option. Do you want to lose weight? Do you want to stop smoking? Do you want to continue to smoke? You have just received this medical diagnosis, and we're trying to understand the best options in the course of what to do next. That is informed choice. We do it as consumers of products. I choose this product over another product because the other product uses harmful additives, or it's more expensive, or whatever the case may be. So informed choice is something that we do regularly in our lives. However, because of a lot of reasons, a lot of dynamics, often when we come into the systems labeled with mental health or substance use issues, that option, that ability to make an informed choice gets replaced with clinical decision making. I'm saying you should be on this medication, and so that's what you need to do, and your job is to comply. I'm saying you need to go to these groups, you need to be at a psychosocial rehab program at least 3 days a week. Your job is to comply. I'm saying, based on my medical opinion, that you need individual therapy, and you need individual therapy with this therapist, this frequency, you need ACT services, you need detox. Whatever my decision is, from a clinical perspective, is what you should do. And your job is to be a passive recipient of services. We are seeing this happen in healthcare with peer support specialists being integrated into health environments. And now we're looking at diabetes, and we're looking at health conditions. We're looking at people utilizing medications, working out, and lifestyle changes. And we want to make sure that peer support specialists are not doing what we call co-opted health. You need to work out. I'll work out with you, but that's what we're going to do when we get together. You need to take your diabetes medication. You need to stop eating sugar. That is advice, and that is power over. That is peer pressure. As peer support specialists, we want to help people to make informed choice with every decision that they have available, even decisions that we don't want them to make or we think shouldn't be an option. Go ahead, Lynn.
Yeah, that's all right. Coercive wellness. You know, we'll do recovery-oriented work, except we're going to do coercive wellness. You will be well, right? It doesn't work. Yep.
Right, so informed decision-making is a combination of, I would add another bubble to this, but knowledge is a part of it. Exposure, right? If I'm choosing to go into a group home or stay in an adult care home, if I have no other level of awareness, if I don't realize that living out in my own place is an option, or living in supported housing is an option, if I don't know home ownership is an option, because I've never been exposed to other ways of being and other possibilities, it looks like choice. Well, you can stay where you're at in an adult care home, or you can go into a group home. That is not informed choice. If the person has not been exposed to other opportunities and other alternatives, and not just in language. Well, do you want to go in a group home or do you want to live in your own place? Hell, I don't know. I've never lived in my own place. I can't even make an informed decision about that because I don't know what it looks like to be in a group home or what it looks like to be in my own place. So as peer support specialists, in addition to knowledge, exposure to the options so that a person can make an informed decision is part of what we do. And as people, then we look at both the positive aspects, we look at the negative aspects, we look at the neutral aspects, and we usually oftentimes utilize support from other people to be able to make the decisions that we want to make. This is a process. It is much easier to tell somebody what to do and to then discharge them for noncompliance, quite honestly, or to pressure them into making the choice that we want them to make than it is to explore with people possibilities and make sure that they have the information to make an informed choice. But there are...
So, yeah, I was going to say, so we want to give you some steps and some tips because we only have about 10 minutes left. So we want to make sure we give you something concrete to bring with you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I use these a lot in my personal life, but when I was working with people as a peer supporter and in other roles, when you break down informed decision making, usually it's around 5 or 6 steps. We could break these even further down, but we condensed it into 5 just so it's really practical for you to utilize in supporting somebody else around decision making. Number 1 is understanding the decision the person wants to make and understanding it without judgment, right? So understanding to hear and be open to hearing and understanding the person's experience without jumping in to change the decision that they want to make. So when somebody comes and says, here's a classic one, I want to go off of my medication, my antidepressants, my antipsychotic, whatever the case may be, oftentimes our first reaction, human being, is to go, oh my gosh, don't do that, right? Instead, what we want you to do is to start practicing sitting with curiosity and sitting with discomfort so that we can understand and you can understand the decision that you want to make. The second one is about exploration. What is it about this decision that feels right? What is it about your current situation that doesn't feel right? So when somebody says, I want to go off my medication, okay, so why? Why do you come to that conclusion? What is it about the medication that isn't comfortable for you? Or maybe it's not comfort at all. Maybe it's cost. Maybe it's accessing it. Maybe it's side effects. There are a lot of reasons why somebody would want to make that decision. And we want to explore with them, what is it about the decision that feels right to you, feels wrong to you? What is it about the current situation that feels right, feels wrong? And we're doing that by asking a lot of questions and with curiosity. If you come to training with Lynn and I around peer support specialists, you will hear us say the majority of the time, peer support ends with a question mark, not a period. If we are making more statements than we are asking questions, we are risking advice versus support. If we are asking questions truly with the intention of understanding, then we are more in a supportive role. The third one is about the information gathering. And sometimes it's information, sometimes it's exposure. What do you need in order to make that decision? This is where going with somebody or doing with somebody can be helpful. So on the group home example, go to different group homes with people, go to supported housing programs, explore what an apartment looks like, right? Because without that even context, you can't make an informed decision. Around medication, gathering information about the medications that you're on, what alternatives look like, the pros and the cons would be the next step, but gathering that information is step 3. Number 4.
Also part of the information, part of the information is what do I maybe have to learn how to do so that I can be successful at this decision? If it's medication, do I need to be able to monitor how I feel if I'm cutting down or changing? For housing, do I need to maybe learn how to balance my checkbook or get a support in there to help me with that? So sometimes it's not just looking at it and saying, well, I don't have what I need in terms of what I need to be able to do, but also supporting people on figuring out, is that something you can learn? Is there support we can get you so that you will have the ability to do that thing?
Absolutely. And guess what you just did? You helped somebody develop a plan or a goal. You know, we hear so many people say, well, nobody has goals, or the goal is a BS goal. I want to be compliant. That's not a goal. I want to take my medications. That's not a goal. We talk about dream-centered planning. How do we support people to imagine the life that they want? When you're gathering this information, including what do you need in order to get there, some of the need are going to be resources, some of the needs are going to be skills, some of them are going to be experience and practice, some of them are going to be support needs. You have just helped somebody develop their own goal and develop a plan or strategies on how to get there by doing this one thing. Number 4, and if everybody would please mute your phones, and we have a couple of people whose lines are unmuted and we're hearing some background. Thank you, everybody. So the next step in this is pros and cons of the decision that you want to make. So gathering all of this information, what are the advantages and the disadvantages of going off your meds? What are the other options? Are there options that you want to add to the decision-making factor? And then the last one is, so make a decision. Supporting somebody unconditionally, so I'm not trying to change the decision that you made or shape the decision. I'm not trying to convince you out of it. I'm saying, okay, you have made the decision that you want to stop taking your medications. What do we need to do to get to that place without, the pros and the cons is stopping it abruptly. Part of that information gathering is knowing the risk. If you stop it abruptly, what could happen? What are the options to get you to the place where you can safely start coming off, and how can I support you, and what do you need to do in order to get that place? That is the action steps. And then what's not on here, number 6, is plan B, plan C, plan D, plan E. If somebody is making a decision that has an element of risk, like going off their medications, like moving or relocating, like starting a job and they've never worked before, or in the past when they've worked, it's been really stressful, and it has led to some emotional distress to them, we want to make a plan, right? So this is where the understanding what that red zone looks like. So how will you know as you're starting to come off of medications, if it's not working, if it's unsafe for you, if it's too risky, and what do you need and what do I need in order to support you? What do you need from me? That is where that contingency planning, that crisis planning, that safety planning, or that Michelle planning, that wellness planning comes into play, is after 5 into step number 6.
And so what we want to do is give you some tips, just some things to think about as you talk to people. And we don't have to go through each of these. I know we're coming to the end of our time, but I would say take some time to read these, because these are things that we all do. They're just good reminders for us. Like, don't jump in with our own arguments when the person stops to take a breath. I've done that. My guess is we all have. So there's like 3 pages of just some really good tips to remind us to take a breath. Remember, we want to support the person to find their way, not jump over into that driver's seat. People who are in my classes know I bring in a steering wheel, and every time somebody tries to jump into that driver's seat, I put the steering wheel right in front of them. That's not our role to drive people's journey. Our role is to support them. The more we support them to find their own way and do this kind of informed decision making, the more skilled they become in running their own life. And that's where we want to go. Unfortunately, our system is guided by the tyranny of low expectations. And think of tyranny. Tyranny kills people. And so we need to raise that bar. We've got to spend time with people to help them figure out their way, no matter how slowly it may be. I love this imagery, koi, which are just brightly colored fish. When we put them in a small fish bowl, like in our house or something, they stay small, they stay the right size, and they live their life out in that little tiny fish bowl. But if we put that same koi in a pond, they can grow up to 3 feet long. We don't want our systems to be those things that keep people in a tiny fish bowl. We want to help them grow, develop, walk through walls, fall down and get smashed up, and then get back up and move forward. Peer supporters are in the best place to do that of anyone else in our systems. We may be the only people doing that. For me, I think it's an honor to support people in doing that, and I hope you get that opportunity too. That's it, guys. We're done.
Wonderful. And remember, the recordings will go in the YouTube channel if you didn't get to see the whole thing or you want to share it. And our PowerPoint slides will go in the Dropbox. If you have questions, please reach out to Lynn and I. If you're looking for the Dropbox link, go on to our PVNC Facebook page and you can find the link that will let you have access to all of our PowerPoint slides. If you want to take a look at this video, the recording, all you have to do is go to our YouTube channel. Beautiful. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you
Have
all.
a beautiful weekend.
Enjoy. Bye, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great
Thanks.
weekend.
You too. You all be well.
So Lynn, I think when we transitioned over the recording, oh no, it looks like you're still recording on your end.
Yeah,
Good,
it's
okay.
recording. Yep. I don't know why when I asked you for the remote, it got so weird. It should have gone smoothly, but it did not.
Can you stop recording real quick?
Yep, I can.